Thank you very much for joining us. This is our 11th lecture on UAE VAT law. This is our 9th lecture on the real estate, and we are discussing today VAT on the construction industry in UAE. We have classified the VAT on the construction industry in three different major areas. The first area is award without advance and without retention. Second case is award with advance and without retention. And third is word with advance and with retention. In this slide, you notice there are two key words. One is advance and second is the retention. These are the part and parcel of the construction industry. Wherever in the construction industry, almost advances will be in every project, and in a lot of the cases, in majority of the cases, retention will be there also. We will see what is the taxability in case advance is there, what is the taxability in case retention is there, and what is the situation in case advance is not there and retention is not there, or any one of them is there. So the first scenario is award without advance and retention. In a word, without advance and retention means only supply of services will be there, supply of construction services will be there. Supply of construction services is taxable at the standard rate. It doesn't matter services are being given to the residential real estate, it doesn't matter services are being given to the commercial real estate. Supply of the contractor will be subject to tax at 5%. Now it can be a single supply by the contractor, it can be a continuous supply by the contractor. In case this is a single supply by the contractor, which deals Article 25 of the UAE VAT law deals with this. They said the date of supply will be receipt of payment, earlier of receipt of payment, earlier of completion of services, or earlier the tax invoice is issued in respect of that supply. So out of these three things, whichever will come first, it will be considered date of supply. And law requires invoice related to this supply required to be issued within 14 days from the date of supply. And the tax period in which that invoice is being issued is required to be reported in the same tax period. I have used the word here, invoice required to be issued and delivered within 14 days. Article 76 of the law require that invoice required to be issued within 14 days. And the Article 65(1) require that invoice required to be issued and delivered. So for the delivery of the invoice, law is silent about the timing. Law is not asking that you need to deliver the invoice within 14 days. Law is asking you need to issue the invoice within 14 days. But by applying a prudence concept, being in the safe side, I am always advising that invoice required to be issued and it needs to be delivered within 14 days from the date of supply. In case of continuous supply law says where there is a consecutive payments, continuous payments, consecutive or periodic payments are over there, then it is called continuous supply. Law says for the continuous supply, date of supply will be earlier of the date of issuance of tax invoice, date of receipt of payment, or date of payment mentioned on the tax invoice, or 12 months from the provision of goods and services. Out of these four things, whichever will come first, it will be considered date of supply. The fourth one is bit important. The fourth one is in case the services has been given and 12 months has been passed, by the end of 12 months, it will be considered the date of supply of the services, and the businesses will be required to issue tax invoice within 14 days from the date of supply. Again, the period in which tax invoice has been issued, it is required to be reported in the same tax period. So in a word, without advance and without retention, we have established supply of services will be subject to tax. Tax invoice required to be issued and delivered within 14 days from the date of supply. and the period in which tax invoice is being issued, it is required to be reported in the same tax period. Next, this is the word with advance and without retention. Second category is word without advance situations. Second category is word with advance and without retention. Means advances will be there, supply of services will be there, but there will not be any retention. So supply of services is subject to tax. So the related advance will also be subject to tax. This is very important thing. Advance that we are receiving, every advance is not subject to tax. If the services are the goods against which advance is being received, if those services and those goods are subject to tax, then advance will also be subject to tax. Otherwise, advance will not be subject to tax. Since the supply of construction services are subject to tax, a related advance will also be subject to tax. So whenever we are receiving advance, whenever the businesses are receiving advance, they need to issue and deliver tax invoice within 14 days from the date of the receipt of advance. And the period in which this tax invoice is being issued is required to be reported in the same tax period. Supply of services. Again, this is the same situation, one-time supply, continuous supply, 100% same situation that we have discussed in the previous slide. Only one difference is there, that whenever tax invoice is being issued, advance required to be adjusted against their tax invoice. This is the same situation in case of continuous supply as well as for the one-time supply. Rest of the everything are constant. Rest of the things were date of supply is constant. Timing to issue and deliver the tax invoice is constant. Invoice will be reported in the same tax period in which invoice is being issued, and the difference is while issuing the tax invoice, advance will be adjusted because on this advance businesses had already paid the tax. They will not be liable to pay the tax again, otherwise it will go and sit in the double taxation. To avoid the double taxation, advance will be adjusted at the time of issuance of tax invoice. Third category is word with advance and with retention, bit complex area. This is a situation where the contractors are receiving advance, then contractors are giving services, are supplying goods along with the services. And the third important thing is contractors have some sort of retention with the customers as well, and it will be released subject to some certain conditions. So first is advance. Advance treatment is same like we discussed in the previous slide. Whenever the advance is being received, business will be liable to issue the tax invoice within 14 days from the date of the receipt of the advance, and it will be reported in the same tax period in which invoice is being issued. One-time supply and continuous supply, this is 100% same like we have discussed in the previous slide. Means date of supply concept is same. Issuance and delivery of the invoice concept is same. Advance will be adjusted at the time of issuance of a tax invoice, it is same, and it will be reported in the same tax period in which invoice is being issued. This concept is same for both of the cases, for one-time supply as well as for continuous supply. Now it comes to the retention. What is retention? Sometime customer is retaining the sum amount. Might be the customer is not accepting the some portion of the work. Might be during the defect liability period, customer wanted to test everything. So customer is retaining some amount and customer is not accepting some portion of the work delivered by the contractor. So it depends. This is a one-time supply or this is a continuous supply against which amount is being retained by the customer. If this is a one-time supply, again it depends that the project that is being carried out by the contractor, that project requires a sign off by the customer or not, or only certification by the supplier is sufficient that it will be considered that the work has been done and services has been provided. It varies from contract to contract. If the contract requires that the sign off is not required, only certification by the supplier is sufficient, then the date of supply will be earlier of the certification by the supplier, earlier of date of issuance of tax invoice, or date of receipt of retention payment. Out of these three things, whichever will come first, it will be considered date of supply of retention, and we will be liable to issue tax invoice within 14 days from this date of supply. In case the contract is required sign off from the customer, so whenever the customer will sign off the contract, then it will be considered date of supply, or earlier of sign off, earlier of date of issuance of tax invoice, or earlier of retention. Out of these three things, whichever will come first, it will be considered date of supply, and contractor will be liable to issue tax invoice within 14 days from the date of supply. This is applicable in case of single supply or one-time supply. In case of continuous supply, situation is almost same. Might be the contract requires sign off from the customer, might be the contract doesn't require any sign off from the customer, and only certification from the contractor is sufficient to be assumed that the services has been delivered. So if the contract doesn't require any certification from the customer, any sign off from the customer, so the date of supply will be 12 months from the date the work was certified by the supplier, date of issuance of tax invoice, or date of receipt of retention payment. Out of these three things, whichever will come first, it will be considered date of supply. In case the contract requires sign off from the customers, then the date of supply of the retention will be earlier of 12 months from the date of sign off, earlier of date of issuance of tax invoice, and earlier of receipt of retention payment. Out of these three things, whichever will come first, it will be considered date of supply of retention, and supplier or contractor will be liable to issue tax invoice within 14 days. Two things are here. One is certification by supplier, one is sign off from customer. Same, these two things are applicable here as well. Certification by the supplier and sign off by the customer. Here the time available is 12 months maximum from the date of sign off. Here the time available is 12 months maximum from the date of certification by the supplier. Here the time available is 14 days from the date of certifications, and here the time available is 14 days from the date of sign off. Rest, receipt of payment or issuance of tax invoice, this is the same in all cases. But for continuous supply, we have a maximum period of 12 months to issue the tax invoice, and for one-time supply, we have a maximum period of 14 days to issue the tax invoice. Lot of businesses, they are doing some sort of planning. They are thinking to delay the issuance of tax invoice because they have a time of 12 months to issue the tax invoice. They believe that they will not issue tax invoice, they will not be liable to pay output tax to the FTA. But they always forgetting one thing: in case they are delaying the issuance of tax invoice, and ultimately they will get money late from the customer, their receipts will be delayed as well. So I personally feel this is not a good strategy to delay the issuance of tax invoice. Invoice is required to be issued on timely basis to get the money from the customer as soon as possible, because this is the VAT that you are getting from the customer. Ultimately you are paying to the government, you are not paying from your pocket. Snagging amount was held by the customer based upon the assumption there will be some sort of issue with the work, and the customer was not satisfied, customer has not signed off the job, so customer was holding the retention amount, and unfortunately there was some sort of issues in the work. When there are some sort of issues in the work, there are two possibilities there. First possibility is there that the work will be done by the original contractor. Second possibility is work will be done by another contractor. If the work is being done by the original contractor, there are two possibilities. Original contractor will not charge any additional fee for the job, and there is a possibility that the original contractor will charge additional fee for the job. If the original contractor is not charging any further consideration to fix the issues, then it will not be considered supply and it will not be subject to tax. It will be considered out of the scope supply. If the original contractor is charging additional fee to fix the error, it will be considered supply and it will be subject to tax, because this is a supply against which consideration is being received from the customer, so it will be subject to tax. If the work is being done by another supplier, so it will be considered straightforward supply of contracting services by third party supplier and it will be subject to tax. And the most important thing is there is a possibility that the customer can withhold the original retention amount. Customer can hold the retention amount in case the customer is not ready to pay the retention amount. Customer believe that there is an issue from the supplier side, from the contractor side, and customer is not ready to release the amount. Then there is two possibilities with the contractor. The contractor can issue a tax credit in the name of the customer, and the contractor will reverse sales as well as output tax, and customer will reverse purchases and input tax. And the second possibility is there that the contractor can avail the bad debt relief provisions and contractor can reverse the output tax as well as related sales as well, but the contractor will be required to fulfill all the conditions of the related bad debts provisions. There are some challenges in the construction sector. I will just quickly go through this, then sometime else we will discuss in detail as well. So first is the revenue recon. Advances which are being received by the contractor, this is not accounting revenue but tax revenue, so reconciliation is required. Progress billing, accounting revenue as well as tax revenue, both have different bases. Accounting revenue will be recognized based upon the stage of completion method. Tax revenue will be recognized on the earlier of receipt of payment, issuance of tax invoice, or completion of service or signing off of the services, or 12 months from the date of sign off or certification. So reconciliation in between tax revenue and accounting revenue will be required here as well. Retention and another amount which will require reconciliation in between accounting revenue and tax revenue. Valuation of certification of work is another challenge in the construction industry. This is very difficult to maintain the sequence of invoices, specifically when you are getting advances. This advance is not your accounting revenue but tax revenue. You need to book the revenue in the system as well. So you will be required to maintain the invoices sequence as well. Another challenge for the people sitting in the construction industry. Another challenge in the construction industry is milestone payments. It will be considered advance for tax purposes. It will be subject to tax as well. Again, it will be required reconciliation. Tracking of advances is another challenge in the construction industry. Tracking of retention, because if the retention sign off has already been done, based upon the sign off, tax revenue has already been reported, tax invoice has already been issued, and amount is being received from the customer after 3-4 years, you will be required to maintain the record of retention as well. You will be required to issue notification to the customer for the collection of money for retention. This is another hectic job in the construction industry. Sometimes supplier invoices are being delivered at a different site where the work is being going on, and it will take time to receive the invoices in the corporate office, and this is leading in the delay in claiming input tax, because we have 2 tax period to claim the input tax maximum. So in case these are being time barred invoices, then we cannot claim input tax through the return. The only option is to pass the VD, voluntary disclosure. These are the key major issues in the construction sector. Thank you very much for joining us. In our next lecture, we will have one comprehensive 1 to 2 hours session on the construction sector. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the video. Click on the bell and subscribe to the YouTube channel.